this is both incredibly boring and yet the craziest news we've heard all week. Rolex is coming out with a new watch this year, and we know what it is, and that never happens.
Yep.
What is up, Watch fam? I am Christian, the curator of the Theo and Harris Vintage Watch Shop.
My name is Sam, and today's episode is brought to you by Henson Shaving.
And today's a great episode. We're talking about the Rolex GMT history, but really the news. People have been stalking Rolex, and they've discovered that there just may be, and there probably is, but we'll talk all about it, a Coke coming for the first time since 2007. This is huge news. Again, we'll have a really long conversation about it. This is not innovation at its finest. In some respects, it's not originality. But on a scientific level, it's interesting. Right, on a production level, it's interesting. But it's not the news I think is coming. I think there's much larger news coming. I think there's much more interesting news coming, and I'm really, really excited for Rolex's releases in April at Watches and Wonders. I think I'll even be there, which will be pretty cool.
It's exciting.
And that's it. So let's see what Rolex. Let's jump right in. As always with Theo and Harris, let's start with the beginning of this Rolex plague of the GMT. Right, the journey of the disaster that is the GMT. The first Rolex was not a Coke.
Correct.
You know this. What was the first Rolex?
My Grail watch, a Pepsi.
A Pepsi, yes. And it was not modern proportion or the design we know today. Very similar, obviously. It was the reference 6542. It was released in 1954, right around the same time as the Submariner.
Yep.
Okay. Developed in a new complication, the GMT, the Greenwich Mean Time, with Pan American Airlines. And the bezel was red and blue, the Pepsi. Do you remember this watch in James Bond?
No.
This is called the Pussy Galore because Pussy Galore wore it. Right?
Damn it, I forgot about that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And there begins the plague. Okay. The plague was from day one that these bezels, these Bakelite bezels, unlike the Submariners, which are manufactured basically in aluminum, right? The Bakelite bezels were, as with all Bakelite products, delicate and prone to breaking. So Rolex was like, we don't have necessarily the technology to produce Bakelite that is resistant to breaking, but this is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And we need a solution. Okay. So the next generation of GMT Master, they're from 1675, introduced an aluminum bezel, okay, like the Submariner. And these didn't break. But what did they do?
Faded?
Exactly right. You know the answer. You know it.
I thought it was a trick question.
Don't be shy.
One thing that I'll just throw in here. Stop. Don't touch my neck.
He gets freaked out with
I don't like my face being touched. Yeah, fun fact about me. What I love, though, about these bezels is I love that they fade. To me, like that's the best thing about these watches. It's probably the biggest flaw, but it is the greatest design hack or design trait that I just appreciate with these watches. I remember real quick when I bought my Baltic, I remember you and I were at a bar and I was like, I finally got a GMT, I got a Baltic, and I was so excited because I was like, oh, like just the green and the blue.
I can't wait till it fades.
I can't wait till it fades. And you're like, it's never going to fade. I was like, what do you mean? And you're like, it's just never going to fade.
It's not aluminum.
I was like, but like, it won't, like even with the sun, and you were like, nope. And I was like, why'd I get this watch?
Yeah, all of a sudden, right? So that was the allure to you, and I totally get it. I love the fading. My dad's GMT faded, and that's what makes it the old lady, right? The GMT, his GMT. But to a brand, right? To a emerging brand, a brand that is supposed to be synonymous with durability and everlasting watchmaking, right? Things that can take a beating. Not good, right? You don't want to produce things in theory, right, that diminish in quality visually, right? It's very obvious, right? So Rolex worked on this and worked on this and worked on this and really couldn't find a solution, maybe some improvements, but ultimately GMT bezels, like all aluminum bezels, but GMT bezels specifically, fade. And they faded all the way up until the 2000s. But before we go there, do you know the first time Rolex introduced the Coke? Because at this point we had Pepsi, right? And then Pepsi, the second color that was introduced was black.
Yes.
And also root beer. In the early 80s, 81.
I was going to say the root beer I knew was in some time in the 80s. I don't know the first time they introduced something else besides Pepsi.
It was right after, but in very limited quantity, in a very interesting GMT. Actually, the first GMT Master 2, reference 16760. Very limited run. It was called the Sophia Loren. It is also called the fat lady, which I think is an incredibly rude thing, because I think Sophia Loren is a,
Why not the big lady?
Why not the big lady? Why not the big boned woman? Why not the maternal lover? And these watches, again, they were thicker. That's why they were called the fat lady, because it actually was a fatter, larger watch. Okay. I remember when you can get a fat lady for, $8,000, and now they're, much more than that, right? They're 12, 13, 15, they keep going up, right? With the quality of condition. Again, these watches are uncommon. You hardly ever see them. And the GMT Coke didn't really get introduced till a generation after, which became an icon. The Coke became an icon in a little bit. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, a message from our sponsor over at Henson Shaving. Henson Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer that has taken their expertise in accuracy and production to essentially revolutionize the world of shaving, improve the world of shaving. The Henson Shaving family has taken their expertise in that field and in their understanding of kind of mechanics and physics and all these different things to craft what is essentially the perfect shaving experience, right? In that their handles give the proper support to the blades themselves, so as to give you the most perfect, beautiful, buttery shave. The Henson Shaving handle and support system is unlike any other. In their production, they use aerospace-grade CNC machines and just achieve the most incredible support and accuracy and comfort. And it actually gets better from there. The razors themselves have built-in channels that evacuate hair and cream, which makes, clogging virtually impossible. And maybe the best part beyond the quality is the affordability. Once you own a Henson razor, it's only about $3 to $5 a year to replace the blades themselves. So to get a better, more beautiful and comfortable shave, visit hensonshaving.com/Theo and receive 2 years worth of blades for free. That's hensonshaving/Theo. Head on over and enjoy. Fast forward into the 2000s, and Rolex discontinued, in 2007, Rolex discontinued all of these aluminum GMT Masters and introduced the ceramic.
Yes.
They introduced it in one color, right? Black.
Yep.
That's it. And they introduced it with a black bezel and a green dial, but it was always black.
Yes.
Okay. Then came what? Do you know? Think about it. The Batman.
Oh, duh.
Batman, one of the greatest GMTs, I think, of all time. I think a beautiful GMT, and I prefer the Batman on Oyster over the Batgirl, but they're both amazing. Okay? And it wasn't until 2014 that Rolex reintroduced the Pepsi, right? So from 2007, 2014, no Pepsis.
7 years.
Insane, right?
Yeah.
Like Rolex for 7 years didn't manufacture what is essentially one of their most famous watches of all time.
Yes.
And then they introduced the Pepsi. Right, and the world went nuts. But the one problem, they introduced it in only
ceramic.
No, only white gold.
Oh.
Rolex reintroduced the Pepsi, and they didn't offer it. They didn't even make it in a model that was really available to people, like regular folks, right? Only to the most discerning of gentlemen.
Souls like yourself.
Souls like me, okay? When I saw that watch come out in 14, I mean, God, I drooled. I swear to God, on my grandmother, I was looking through my phone pretty recently, and I saw a screenshot on my phone of that original Pepsi when it came out in 14. I mean, I was really into watches 2013, 14, 15. And when that watch came out, I said, one day I'll own that watch. I swear, And then when I ultimately bought it, to be honest, it was not a journey that whole time. I was not thinking about it all those years. I bought it in 2023. Yeah. So basically 9 years later, it wasn't a journey.
Well, I can tell you never mentioned the idea of getting a Pepsi, because you always said essentially that I'll get my dad's one day.
It's my dad's watch.
It's my dad's watch, and why would I get a Pepsi?
Makes no sense.
And then you sprung it on me like, yeah, I just bought this. And then I tried it, my hands fell to the floor because it's so heavy. Right. And I said, that's why he got it.
But this was the return of the Pepsi. This is the rebirth of the Pepsi, right? A couple of years later, they introduced it in the steel. But now here begins that, or continues that plague. The plague of the Pepsi.
Let's hear it.
Okay. These bezels were very difficult to manufacture. Yes. No one knew if that was a rumor or if that was the truth, though. Yeah. People said, Rolex keeps changing the color. Right? The original Pepsi bezels were these bright bezels like I have here, right? The original ceramic Pepsis, these bright bezels. Then they went to Mark II, version 2, Mark III, Mark IV, darker. And everyone was like, are they changing it for appeal? What is the reason, right? People had difference in opinion about, why or which one was better. But ultimately, the rumors that the Pepsi, the red and blue in ceramic was so difficult to make were true. right? The rumors became more pervasive, and it kind of became known that Rolex was having a very high error rate, that these bezels were breaking or bleeding, right? And for every Pepsi bezel that came to the market, dozens. I heard the number was 60 were made and broken. Is that true? I have no idea, but this problem is true.
Yes.
And all of this time, I don't know when Rolex started to try to develop the Coke, but from 2007, they haven't made a Coke. And now it's 2024, right? I mean, we're talking about, almost 2 decades later. And Rolex has finally applied for a patent and received their patent for the ceramic Coke. If you love watches like I do, if you think that they mean something more than the time, then head on over to theoandharris.com and shop our selection of vintage watches and handmade straps. They're unique and they're special, and once they're gone for good.
There was talk about them potentially stopping GMTs in general because of these bezels being so hard to create. Am I correct?
Absolutely correct.
Which is nuts to think about, because it's just like, I don't know, like every time I think of Rolex, to me, again, this is my girl watch, I always think of GMT over any other watch.
Rolex not being able to produce a Pepsi would be the equivalent of, not quite one for one, but Hershey's losing the mold to the Kiss.
Yeah.
Right? These two things are, right? They are chained to each other, right? They're foundational, right? Hallmarks, pillars of the brand, right? They have other products, right? The Hershey's bar, all these other things, right? They have a big portfolio, but imagine a world without a Kiss.
So is the Submariner the Kiss, or is the GMT the Kiss?
Buddy, it's a fucking, I'm just
asking you a question.
I clearly just said GMT. But the Submariner could just as easily be the Kiss.
Okay.
I just mean an important.
No, I gotcha.
Yeah. So that's the interest. That's where we are up until today.
Yes.
Right? Rolex has received the patent. How people found out about this, I have no idea. That means that some nut job is stalking the patent office or something, but they are. And when I say nut job, I mean that as an endearing term. Clearly you're obsessive, and the community thanks you for it.
Of course.
So now the question is, will Rolex release the Coke this year?
Initially I would assume so. But just because you applied for the patent, you got the patent approved, does that mean that you're ready to produce? I don't know.
That's a very good question. It's a very good question. Second question, assuming you're ready to produce. Rolex knows that people look for their patents, and Rolex hates predictability, right? Rolex is actually a much more fun brand than people realize, right? From the days of the Stella dials to the Celebration to all these different things, right? Rolex loves having fun. And the Panda, right? They teased the Panda for years in ceramic, right? And wouldn't do it. So I guess the question is Rolex really, knowing full well that the Coke patent was going to leak, are they really going to give the world what they want right now?
I would assume no.
And if they do, will they pull the precious metal move again? Will they release the Coke in platinum? Right? Will they produce it in white gold? I don't know. I have no idea. But I would bet they're not releasing it in steel.
I think that's fair.
Next question. The Coke will be released when it is, at the same price as the GMT. Around, I think it's $10,700. What will be the secondary value? Keeping in mind, people have been waiting for a Coke since 2007.
If I had to take a rough guess, I would imagine it would double and go around 20.
Well, the GMTs right now are around 20.
Ooh.
So would it demand a premium over a Pepsi?
I don't know. And I don't know, and I'm coming from, my thought process is I was always familiar with the Pepsi. I was never really familiar with the Coke. So I'm assuming there's a demand for it. There obviously is. People are going to love this watch.
Certainly.
Because it hasn't been released since 2007.
Why shouldn't?
That being said, I don't know. I guess I think that initially it would probably jump to be more than 20. but I think it would end up correcting itself. It's probably closer to 2018, something around there.
I completely agree.
I think that makes sense.
I think you'll see them nearing 30,000. I think you'll see the initial ones go around 30. Then I think you'll see, them kind of settle around maybe 25, 23, 24, right? A little over a GMT. And I think in the end of the day, the Pepsi will be worth more.
Yeah, I also look at it, and not to compare a Rolex to a Moonswatch, but remember how hard those were to get, and everyone was just asking for any sort of price on eBay initially?
Right.
Just because the hype was there, and then
But the Coke will never be easy to get.
No.
Yeah. But I see what you mean.
But that's where
that initial shock is insane.
It'll definitely be high, and it'll correct.
I agree.
So the question that I have for you, assuming this got released in a precious metal, a white gold, or a platinum, if this was around when you made the purchase of your Pepsi, would you have went Coke?
No, I'm not a Coke guy. No, I'm not a Coke guy. Every
time you eat pizza, you get a Coke.
I know that's true. I love wine. I'm a big wine guy. I love it. But when I eat Italian food, generally speaking, particularly casual Italian food, and always pizza, I don't drink wine. I drink Coke. That's it. And I'll actually tell you guys a great story on the Zero about me ordering Coke at a table. I'll go to the Zero. It's a private podcast about watches, behind the scenes, real industry talk, unfettered, and some personal stories. And if you go join on the Zero, shoot me a DM and we can talk over there. And it's a great community and there's content all the time. We released our thoughts on the Piaget Polo, and the thoughts on the Zero were way stronger, way more accurate, than they were on YouTube. So go ahead and become a Zero on a free trial. Go ahead. But no, I'm a Pepsi guy.
Yeah.
My father is a Pepsi guy. The Coke has never resonated with me because this is completely emotional.
Yeah.
It's totally emotional. I love my Pepsi. I would never sell my Pepsi. This is probably I'm being a little dramatic, but this is the only watch other than my, Datejust that I couldn't sell.
Of course.
That's it. It's my Datejust and my GMT.
It's also your only sports watch.
My only sports watch, but I love it. It's my dad, and it's for me, it's a story of the American dream, right? In many ways, and father-son bond, and it,
Just to me, the GMT, to you have a very father-son relationship with GMT. It's very much a you and your dad story.
Yep.
For me, I remember seeing Rolly wear that watch when we were younger in high school and being like, that's a really cool watch.
Yeah.
And then when you realize that you could track different time zones and everything else, and me growing up, I always loved the idea of traveling, but we would take trips on the East Coast. So we were never changing time zones.
No.
Very, very, we just weren't changing time zones. So for me, wanting to travel and that idea of getting out into the world and seeing, everything outside of the East Coast and the tri-state area, I love the idea of like, oh wait, but I could always know what time it is at home. And I could always know what time it is wherever the case is. I just think that story in itself is just very romantic.
There's something very poetic.
Which is why I am just, in love with GMTs in general, but specifically the Pepsi.
I agree. So that's a pretty brief and succinct history of the GMT and how it's been plagued from day one. Rolex will certainly be producing a Rolex GMT Coke soon. I do not believe it will be this year. When they do come out, they're going to be really expensive and impossible to get, as always. But the real question for me is, or I'll set the scene. The world doesn't need a new Coke in the way it needs a new Milgauss. And I've been saying this for 2 years, 3 years maybe. The world has been saying this publicly. This is not just my opinion, but it's so true. The world needs a lot of things. The luxury consumer world.
Rolex world, the watch world.
And my grandfather would say, the world needs a head examination. It needs everything. Insanity check.
He needs an insanity check.
The Rolex world needs a new Milgauss. That's the real point here, guys. And that when they release a new Milgauss, and it will be soon, it will be at some point, but it will be soon, that will be important. That will be the product of innovation in a more real way, or at least of design, right? The Coke is a product of technical innovation, right? Of this kind of chemistry, right? Figuring out how to make these materials work. But the Milgauss will be a design experiment where the Coke is not, right? The Coke it was introduced in, 82, 83, and it's the same thing now, right? But that Milgauss will be really important. And I'm looking forward to that when that happens. And it's funny, right? Because, there have been patents and rumors about the Milgauss for years. Rolex teases Rolex teases, like any good girl, Rolex teases, right? And that's the truth. And I'll leave you guys with that. If you want to join the Zero for more conversations like this, real, unfiltered conversation, head on over. We're a blast. We're actually going to record an episode pretty soon over a couple of drinks.
Yes,
we've got like 900 members over on the Zero, and I want to see you over there. So go sign up and let's have some fun. And that's it.
F-U-N, fun.
F-U-N-E. Straps, as many of you should know, bring a whole world of potential to mix up your watch collection. They breathe new life into watches. They help you pull out different colors. They give them new personality. Straps can be very addictive. I know people with 2 watches and 10 straps because it adds so many facets to a collection in a fairly easy and fun way. So that's why they become such a part of the Theo and Harris culture and identity. I think we sell more exotic straps than almost anybody because I just love them so much and I love sharing them with you.